It's back in the 19th century. Many of the gravestones in cemeteries across both America and in England were inscribed with two Latin words. They were in a form of a question. The Latin words, if there are any Latin scholars here, Quo vadis? Translation, where are you going? Or, more accurately, where are you going? In the 20th century, just in that same time frame, a tombstone inscribed by a man named Lewis Howell had a very clever but rather chilling epitaph on his tombstone. He wrote, "As you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so shall you be. Prepare for death and follow me." He had a neighbor who purchased the plot right next to Mr. Howell's grave. The neighbor had a sense of humor. And so he wrote this on his tombstone. "Wherever you are, I wish you well, up in heaven or down in hell. But to follow you, I'm not content until I know which way you went." Just a few years ago, there was a very fascinating book that was written by a rather preeminent physician, Eben Alexander. He entitled his book, Proof of Heaven. He is a neurosurgeon, a Duke graduate, and a professor of neuroscience at Harvard University School of Medicine. At the very peak of his medical career, he contracted a very aggressive form of E. coli that invaded his brain. His condition put him into a coma and left him teetering between life and death for days on end. That he returned to consciousness at all was a miracle unto itself. But the real story that emerged was the near-death experience and doctors' reported foray into the realms of eternal life. He had described himself as a Christmas and Easter Christian. He described himself as a scientist, unable and unwilling to reconcile his knowledge of science with his belief in God or hope of the afterlife. This near-death experience literally changed everything. The doctor wrote, and I quote, "The near-death experience showed me that the death of the body and the brain are not the end of consciousness, and that human experience continues beyond the grave. What I underwent was real in a way that makes the life or living here now completely dreamlike by comparison." His decision as a doctor to go public and to go into print placed him at odds with certain segments of the medical and the scientific community. He was called by his detractors a charlatan and a soothsayer scientist, but he refused to be silenced. The negative consequences of his decision to go to print were overridden by his conviction that at the time of death, and I quote, "Life continues under the gaze of a God who loves and cares so much about each of us. I have been there," he wrote, "and have personally experienced the life that awaits us beyond the grave. And I now see it as my duty as a scientist and a seeker of truth, to make it known to as many people as I can that what I underwent is true and real and of stunning importance. Proof of Heaven, a New York Times bestseller for weeks in a row in a country raised on the denial and avoidance and whitewashing of death and afterlife. What the doctor wrote is very consonant with what the Church holds and teaches as sacred. That we are made for a place that no eye has seen, no ear heard, nor is the heart of man so much as conceived, what is prepared for those who love him. But there's a difference between the proof of heaven spoken of by this doctor and what the Church professes with all our hearts. First and foremost, wrote the Holy Father, Pope John Paul, we do not teach simply a dogma or a program or a proof, but a person. The person who has been raised from the dead and has opened wide the gates of heaven. He is our way when there is no other way. Our hope when we have no hope. Our light when night overcomes us. He is our path when the path of life becomes obscured and uncertain. Through baptism, you and I have received a passport through the gates of everlasting life. You and I also know, like the apostles, we face uncertainty and adversity. And the prayer made by the apostles this day with all their hearts was spoken to the Lord. Increase our faith, they said. To which the Lord said, if you had the faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to a mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted into the sea. In a very impassioned plea to massive crowds gathered in St. Peter's Square, Pope Francis wrote these words as an antidote for our fragile and unbelieving selves. He said, let the risen Jesus enter your life. Welcome him as a friend and welcome him with trust. If up until now you've kept him at a distance, step forward. He will receive you with open arms. If you have been indifferent toward him, take a risk. You will not be disappointed. If following him seems difficult, don't be afraid, but trust him. Be confident that he's close to you, and he will give you the peace you so long for. Why are you looking for the living among the dead? On this holy morning, we gather as a community, aware that our own souls are beset with frailty and sometimes doubt. Come to the one who is calling you by name. Come to him who is ready to accompany you on the journey of life. Come to the one who is reaching out to you when you face doubt or difficulty, struggle or strain. His name is Jesus. Quo vadis? Where are you going? Come and walk with him. Quo vadis. Walk in the company of the one who loves you so tenderly. If today you hear his voice, harden not your heart.